All right, so the first thing that landed on the list for me was that this year saw a paradigm shift in the way that Microsoft licenses the top tier of their products. And this has been kind of a long time coming, right? We've seen Microsoft grow from back in the early days of cloud licensing, where there were some few standalone products. Then we sort of got some suites put together, and initially there was an E1 and there was an E2 for a brief period of time, and then there was an E3, and then eventually things got to the point where there was this overarching E5 that you could purchase into, and you can buy all the little bits and bots of it as a P1 or a P2, but ultimately everything rolls up into an E5. In fact, the E5s even roll up into other E5s. And as Microsoft was kind of knocking on the AI door, we started to see a lot more interest and question from folks around whether or not there was going to be an E7. It was a logical progression from E5 to go to E7. Yeah, but that didn't happen. What we instead got was a bunch of fractured offerings across most of the modern work and security suites. And in fact, you'll see right here is a quick list of things that's not exhaustive, right? Of things that have.
To see SharePoint on this list.
Yes, well, SharePoint Premium didn't exist until Ignite, right? So, we used to just have SharePoint was part of Office 365, so was Teams, but Teams and Intune kind of like broke the dam open back in the spring of this year with this idea of licensing outside the E5 model. So what it ends up looking like here, and I'm just taking Entra ID, which is the evolution of Azure Active Directory, as an example here too. You have these tiers that have existed, right? So there's M365 E3 license includes the Entra ID P1. Then if you step up to the E5, you get the offerings that are a part of the P2. But then there's this curious thing called identity governance, and that is a standalone license. And a lot of the features that had been, and this is an example that's different from how a lot of them work. In this particular one, some of the features that had been included in the P2 got shuffled over into the identity governance standalone offering. And we'll talk about that one a little bit later on too, because that separately is actually one of the things that it did make the list. But it was a very fascinating paradigm shift to move from this idea of everything goes up and gets to a top tier level to an idea where if you need things beyond the E5 level, it's likely that you have compartmentalized needs for those individual users or groups, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense. If we had gone to a straight up E7 model, the cost per user license would be astronomical, right? The things that we're talking about adding on here at Copilot, its introductory price at $30 a user a month as an E7 would have been very challenging. But looking at those requirements is saying compartmentalized across user types, across, these users have this security requirement, or these users have this identity requirement, or whatever it may be, allows it to be a little bit more a la carte, if you will, right? Which is kind of funny because that's actually where we started from. But I do think it makes sense in terms of if you have needs that go beyond E5, again, it's likely that you're getting to a point of compartmentalized needs for those users. Now, not everything went this way, because number 9 on my list.
I was going to ask about universal print.
Yeah, I know. And I've been so excited. So if you look on our YouTube channel, you go back about as far as you can with the content that we have published out here. I think one of the oldest webinars that we have was the introduction to universal print webinar. Yeah, I've been very passionate about this product since it came out, because this is one of the longest and hardest challenges of migrating organizations away from having an on-prem infrastructure requirement, right? It always came back to file and print. I have a printer somewhere. And there have been lots of different ways that we band-aided around this, but universal print actually provided an option for organizations to finally get rid of print servers. But when it first came out, it was a little bit challenging because it was one of those add-on solutions, right? It actually kind of was one of the ones that existed separately. Well, it's been rolled in. It's been rolled into the Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 SKUs. And they've kind of stopped calling it well, I can't say they haven't stopped calling it, but they've got a new nickname for it, and you'll find it in some of the blog posts, is that they're saying universal print or unlimited print, right? Because
I don't. Ooh.
Well, hold on though, because it used to be 5 print jobs per user per month, and now it's up to 100, and it's all pooled. So you don't have this, slushy pool that's sitting around here with just a few. If you have 1,000 users, you have 100,000 print jobs. Now, you're not, if you can afford to print 100,000 separate jobs, then you're going to run out of toner long before you run out of license, right?
So unlimited print just doesn't sound as good as universal print.
You're right, it doesn't.
I don't know why. But it does.
But one of the biggest challenges to the way it was implemented early was that restriction of 5 print jobs per user, and that was a major impediment. Plus, we got Mac OS support. We got QR code secure release on iOS and Android. So if you've printed something that shouldn't show up in a random strange place, you can now actually walk up to a device, and until you scan that QR code and hit release, it will not actually come out. So sensitive HR documents will no longer show up on the device just waiting for someone to walk by and grab them. There's also just announced at Ignite in preview is this idea of what's called pull print. And this is something that I begged the universal print engineers to figure out a way to implement over a year ago. And that is, I, as a user, may travel from satellite location to satellite location. Maybe we've got 10 stores in the region and I need to go to any one of those stores. I don't want to worry about having to know which store I'm in and figure out from the list of printers what matches where I am. I want to hit print and I want it to come out of the printer. And that's what just got announced in preview at Ignite. It hasn't been opened up to public preview to my knowledge, but pull print should allow people to print to the geographically closest printer to them. So again, going back to the licensing discussion, not everything is going to that a la carte conversation. We do have plenty of things that are rolling in, and that's a very good thing. So if you have Microsoft 365 E3 or E5, you can basically print like gangbusters as much as you want to. It's come a long way. I'm super proud. And incidentally, as for the logos that are on this slide, there are a lot of third-party cloud products that used to need a print queue to direct their jobs to. And those applications are on the left here with the third-party cloud app support. They can now actually target universal print as a direct print destination. And the devices on the right, the manufacturers or brands there, they now actually have direct support in their devices to be connected to universal print. So we're removing that infrastructure requirement of having a VM that basically does nothing more than pump jobs to physical devices. So it's getting a lot better. The volume is increasing, and again, it's becoming an included license. So super cool on that front.
That is very cool.
Next up, Microsoft very quietly last month announced, very quietly in a blog post. Actually, no, it wasn't even last month. It was just over a week ago. It was 9 days ago. Yeah. So QR code phishing or crishing is becoming a larger concern as organizations, start relying more on QR codes. We're seeing commercials on TV that have QR codes. My kids are getting things sent home from their teachers that have QR codes. And some of us in the InfoSec community are maybe a little bit more paranoid than others about the risks that are associated with that. I can't see where that URL is going. I can't hover over it and see where it's going to go. So Microsoft has very quietly introduced QR code phishing detection in both Exchange Online Protection, which is the MX record side of things, and also in Office 365 or Defender for Office. Okay. And depending on the license level that you bring to it, you may get different capabilities that are in here. But they announced in that blog post just over a week ago that they've already caught and prevented over 3 million phishing attacks through QR code phishing. Now, right now, what that's relying on is image detection. And it was quickly pointed out as a response to that blog post that there are a lot of different ways to build a QR code on a web page. So we expect that this capability will increase and grow over time. But we're already, again, blocked over 3 million, scanned over 100 million, right? We're seeing all of this stuff as something that's been very effective. And it was just sort of turned on quietly. This is something they just did in the background. So really cool capability. And again, if you already own Office or Exchange Online Protection, which if your MX record is Microsoft, you just get this, right? This is just one of those things that you just get it. It's not any additional charge. It's rolled into existing capabilities without having to scale up to anything else.
I feel like this is one of those big things where people, it's like it's one of those technologies that they have it, but they don't know they have it, and they can take huge advantage of it.
Absolutely, right? I mean, like
you say that all the time, but like this is one of the big ones.
Yeah, and to have it quietly announced as a blog post, it's not even in the admin center. There's nothing public about this, right? It's just, well, except for the blog post. So there are a lot of capabilities that kind of come in this way. They get trialed in production, and then eventually it may become mentioned as a service plan or something like that. But right now, this is included. So if you have Exchange Online Protection or if you have Defender for Office, you have this. This is already running on your behalf. Super cool. Well, number 7 on the list, I don't have a big slide built out for this or anything right here, but Purview, near and dear to my heart, right? One of our absolute most popular YouTube videos of all time, still getting thousands of views out there, was going into the Purview Compliance Center and digging in through all the capabilities that exist there. We got very quietly announced, well, actually, this wasn't quietly announced. Back in February, Microsoft announced that we were going to get adaptive protections. This was built on the change last year that happened where Windows Information Protection went into deprecated mode and became a component of endpoint DLP. And now when users do things that constitute risky behaviors, endpoint DLP, insider risk management, and the entire compliance portal or Purview, suite of tools start taking actions as adaptive protections for your data. Your user may be a normal user, but they appear to be doing some rather curious things, right? Maybe they are downloading a whole bunch of files that they generally don't get access to. Well, we can actually frame up protections in real time, or actually Purview will simply do this for us now in real time to make sure that we have time to investigate to make sure this user is not maybe trying to take some corporate secrets out the door. That was really, really cool. And that's been there since, gosh, February. And if you go into your compliance portal and you have any of the qualifying components that allow you to turn this on, there will be a great big blue box that says, turn this on, and you just turn it on, right? You can build up rules in it as much as you'd like to, but it's just something you can just turn on. The other thing that happened here too was Microsoft made an announcement last year that they were partnering with Adobe to bring sensitivity labels into PDF files. And that was neat, but it really wasn't fully featured. But we got the ability to do native sensitivity labeling and encryption of PDFs, which we've actually taken advantage of internally. I don't know if you've been receiving encrypted PDFs, but I certainly have in the last few weeks. I see this as being a transformative experience for law firms, because the number one export of any law firm is PDFs. And once it went to PDF, you kind of lost control of the security of it. Well, now we can actually make sure that our clients or our trusted business partners or whoever, they're able to receive and process those PDFs with the exact same protections and capabilities that we had when those documents were just internal. It's no longer just a label that tells you what it's supposed to be. It actually brings encryption and protection to those PDFs, and it's native, right? You're in Word, you hit export to PDF, whatever label was on that file goes right with that file to the exported PDF. So it's super duper cool. It's super simple. It's no added friction for the user. The only thing is that the recipient has to be on the included list of permissions to have access to that content. Very simple. I actually, this started out my list actually even higher up, but I think you might find some things that supplanted it a little bit farther. Next on the list at number 6 is deceptions and disruptions in Defender XDR. I could have opened this up and said Microsoft renamed the Defender stack to Defender XDR, but actually there were 2 things that were introduced into the stack that I thought were so amazingly cool. And they were introduced without any additional licensing requirements. Again, we started this thing talking about Microsoft moving outside of the scope of E5, but they actually added a lot of things that were internal, or that added a lot of things to the E5 stack all up. So we got automatic attack disruption against identities and devices, and we also got really cool honeypot capabilities and transaction-based lures to bring people into our honeypots. And I thought this was super cool. I actually started to do an on the bike video about this, and then ended up never finishing editing it. So we get to talk about it here. In terms of the automatic attack disruption, right? This was simply added on to every single product that's at the bottom of this page. And I apologize for some of the very busy slides here. I wanted to keep my slide count to a minimum so we could talk about this stuff and focus on content. Anyway, if you have any one of these things, right? So E3 plus the capabilities, or E5, kind of across the board, A5, whatever, right? You get these capabilities called automated response actions, and they can include device containment, or user disabling, or user containment. And those mean different things, but they are based on the licenses that are available to you. I show it on the far right here. The contained device was an actual administrator initiated action that's been possible. We don't have to do that anymore. Defender can simply reach in and say, no, this device appears to be under attack. We're going to contain it. The same thing can be done now for users. They can also be disabled if you have Defender for identity, but if you don't, and you just have these other core workloads here, you can take these actions. And this was an automated capability added to disrupt command and control behaviors. It was just sort of dropped out there a couple months ago, right? And again, no license add-on requirements for this. It was just added. Then at Ignite, we got the added capabilities for disruptions. And this is a slide that actually was born out of Microsoft's Digital Defense Report from last year. And when I was invited to speak at RVASec over the summer, and I was talking about how much users love their passwords, I wanted to show kind of what the major findings were that Microsoft had encountered when they went in to help corporations deal with cyber risk, right? When they had been brought in to either do cyber risk assessments, or they'd been brought in after the fact, after dealing with a challenge, these were the top findings that they had. And there were two core areas where they found that most organizations had done pretty well. And in fact, my favorite of them is that we actually have done pretty darn well with recognizing the importance of endpoint detection and response. This is super cool, right? So if we're going to add features to any given area, they probably ought to either be in here, or in the SIM area, or in the immutable backups area, right? So to my absolute joy and delight, they gave us this ability in Defender for Endpoint P2 as it's just here. Here's an AI capability that is just baked in, where we can build deceptions and lures. And look down at the bottom, I got a definition of what these are, right? These are artificial cyber attack surfaces in your network that consist of decoys and lures that look like high value assets to any outside adversary. Now, the thought with this is, the bad guys are already in, right? So we've been doing assume breach for a couple of years. Or actually, I guess probably 5 or 6 years at this point. We're working with that assume breach model. We need to be able to find the bad guys when they're in. It's already really, really challenging to find the bad guys when they're in, right? We used to talk about the average time to detection was, it started out as like 200 some odd days. It got down to like 80 some days at one point. It seemed to grow back up again. The ways that major large corporations would deal with this would be to deploy honeypots in their environment. Maybe they put them on the edge to try to draw the attackers there. Maybe they put them inside the network. To do that, though, yes. But to do that would require a major investment in time, in physical resources, in rack and stack, in understanding the technologies, in bringing people up to speed, in training your SOC not to monitor, or maybe even training your endpoint configuration people not to deploy solutions to these things that are meant to be attacked. Well, what happens here is these decoys, these accounts, and these hosts, they don't exist. They are purely artificial. They appear in your list of transactions, and they appear in behaviors, and they appear to an attacker, but you can't go query them in Intune. You can't go query them in Entra ID. You can't accidentally try to go pull up details on Darrell UL, right? That's not an account that exists, but that is an account that's generating traffic inside your environment. It's generating transactions. And those transactions are intended to appear to be high value transactions, so that when that attacker who's been sitting there for 70 days decides to look for who's the high value or person in this organization to make a lateral movement and attack, that account appears to be suddenly transacting with executive classified documents or downloading files or doing things that are attractive. And the second they try to engage with that, red alert, all the sirens go off, right?
All the buzz.
Yeah, but this is just a rule you just turn on, right? If you have Defender for Endpoint P2, you just turn it on. And you can go in and you can tweak this thing as much as you want to. You can scope it down to specific device groups if you want to. You can turn on what they call basic or advanced lure types, or you can actually even create and upload your own, but you just own it. If you have Defender for Endpoint P2, you just own it, right? And that's super duper cool, right? Again, these are AI workloads that we anticipated landing in what would have been an E7 that are simply landing in E5. And for anybody who hasn't heard my explanation of what constitutes E3, E5, E7. E7 obviously doesn't exist.
I'm gonna say E7.
E3, yeah, E3 would have been core workloads, right? Whether it's productivity or security, it's the core workload. I need to deliver this application. I need to configure this device. I need to protect this account. E5 is where you get the advanced analytics and the reporting and some of the automated behaviors and automated responses. Where we saw E7 potentially landing was when you would layer in those AI workloads. So what's fascinating with this is that some of these AI workloads are landing right here in the E5 P2 capabilities. I am over the moon excited about this because this capability itself in a zero trust assume breach mindset will reduce time of the attacker in your environment. I can almost guarantee it by at least 50%, if not more. This is a very substantial and important consideration. And again, I know that not all small and medium businesses own Defender for Endpoint P2, but again, Microsoft has identified that most customers now recognize the critical importance of endpoint detection and response. So if you're thinking, hey, what's the value that I would get out of P2? You get all of the automated detections and response, plus you also get these lures and decoys. This is such a financial and time-saving capability. I can't gush enough about it.
So everyone go get
excited.
this as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we covered the bottom half, and nothing in the bottom half should be identified as being unimportant, right? But now moving into the top half.
I'm excited.
Microsoft.
I want to see if anything that I guessed is going to be on your top 5.
Well, I haven't talked about them yet, so.
Well, I know. I'm hoping.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
You roll the dice.
Yours. Adrian, take it up.
All right. So number 5 on my list, Entra ID. We got to go back a little bit in time here. We got to go back to June of 2012. Prior to June of 2012, I had support for BPOS, right? And all the early instances of Office 365. If I wanted to replicate on-premises accounts to BPOS, to the early Office 365 environment, to my Skype for Business, might have even been Link at the time, I had the ability to synchronize my accounts over to the cloud. And I could even do password hash sync, I think, by June of 2012. I think that was a capability that was introduced in 2011. But I did not have any ability to actually directly manage those accounts. There was no way I could do that. I could copy them over. Beyond that, I had to call Microsoft, and my office door was routinely closed because I was on the phone with Microsoft asking for them to do things like change passwords. Like literally, you had to call Microsoft to ask them to do that. In June of 2012, Microsoft introduced what they called Azure Active Directory. And it was, to my mind, no coincidence that June of 2012 was also the date at which Small Business Server was deprecated. It was very clear to me that at the time, in what they, I'm sure, have now changed, they viewed Azure Active Directory as being focused on small business and replacing Small Business Server, right? Those two things happened within the span of one actual calendar week. Right, the deprecation of SBS, introduction of Azure AD, those were in the same week. that has grown a lot, and we have relied on Azure Active Directory to do a lot of the identity workloads that we brought from Active Directory, but it never worked the same way. It was never designed to behave the same way. Active Directory has OUs and group policies and all those different things that you would apply at different levels, and there was a lot of complexity to it, and it was frankly overwrought for a lot of what needed to be done at a very simple identity management level in the cloud. And so we had a lot of folks either buying bolt-on solutions or bringing attributes in or doing crazy mapping and all this stuff to try to make the cloud do what on-premises did. And then kind of weirdly, about 5 or 6 years ago, we got to the point where the cloud could do a lot more than what we could do on-premises. And Microsoft sort of quietly said that they were done developing Active Directory, which has now changed, and that's fine. But this year, we finally got this recognition that Entra ID is a fundamentally different mechanism for managing identity from the way we do it on premises. And that allows us to do some other really cool things, right? Where we don't have to try to force these two pegs to be the same shape and fit in the same hole. What we got is the beginning of a migration of settings management into Microsoft offering these up as service offerings. And the first ones that we saw around that, and again, this was something I got to present on at RVASec literally the day after it was announced, so it was pretty interesting. We got this concept of system preferred and Microsoft managed, and you're going to start to see that more in your Entra ID environment, both in the user settings and conditional access controls. We're getting to this idea of, I don't want to be responsible for having to keep up with what's the best practices from one day to the next. Security changes so frequently, I can't keep up. Microsoft, you're in touch with all this stuff. Just set whatever is supposed to be the best thing. Obviously, that's not palatable for everybody, but if you can take your hands off of that process, you can put your hands into a lot of other processes, things that may actually benefit the business in ways that just managing identity doesn't really do for you. So we started to see this evolution of moving things to Microsoft managed. But we also got some really, really super cool capabilities here too, in Microsoft making passwordless free for all users. This was something that we have been waiting to see for a long time. This was paywalled behind Entra P1, or actually at the time Azure AD P1, but the Authenticator app, and as of March or April, Outlook having its own baked-in Authenticator Lite. So users no longer even get to say, well, you're not putting another app on my phone. Well, we don't need to, right? We can handle all the number matching and all the biometrics and all that kind of fun stuff. We can do. Yeah, it's remarkable, right?
Yeah.
And then just a couple months ago, they announced that we're going to start suppressing MFA prompts for risky sign-ins, and that's just included, right? So, if somebody's hammering on your account, it used to be you could just bombard them with requests to approve it, and eventually they would do it. Well, now Microsoft can detect those bombardments and say, you know what, that's not real. You're not going to get prompted for that. So yeah, and this is free for all users. It's super duper cool. We also then got Microsoft evolving the concept of security defaults. So this is another one we kind of have to go back about a whole decade to begin to see Microsoft starting to push customers to adopt MFA. And they started it internally. They had a policy that said in the Xbox department, right, if you were going to have an account after 60 days, it had to be enabled for MFA. They had a lot of pushback there. We know a lot of small businesses and even enterprise organizations really struggled with pushback from users. Around 2019 or so, Microsoft introduced this concept of security defaults that were intended to help push organizations over some of those hurdles, right? You don't want to go in and start building out conditional access policies. You don't have time for that. Maybe your security requirements don't really brush up against that area. So we're going to turn this on for you. We're going to make some basic assumptions about things that you probably don't want to have happening, and we're going to make those the defaults. Well, when they turned those on in 2019, they started to see adoption of MFA go from 0.9% globally to just over 25% globally of all authentications. They started to see this nice big uptick. Yeah, but it stalled out at 35%, right? So we got over the initial barriers. Then last year, they said, all right, for every organization that has existed since before 2019, we're going to go ahead and turn on security defaults for you if you don't already have conditional access policies. And that saw another boost in MFA traffic. But what they did just last month was or actually 2 months ago, they announced it. We started to see customers that were seeing this turned on as of last month. They are now creating these automatic conditional access policies in tenants, especially those that already have CA policies defined. And again, here you're going to see that Microsoft managed. And they're turning these policies on so that if you are accessing admin portals, because crazy enough, even though they got to 35% globally, it was no better for admins. Admins are some of the worst users at turning on MFA. So when these come on, you'll see they're listed right here above all of your other policies, and they actually already have visual information in them. They're turned on in report only mode, so they're not really turned on. They're set in report only mode, but they have these policy impact graphs set so that you can jump in here, immediately see, hey, what is the behavior that's happening with this? And you can decide whether or not to turn this on. You get 90 days to decide whether or not to turn it on. Microsoft is strongly advising that you not turn it off, but you do need to do some impact assessment and figure out if this is going to. Yeah, I mean, you know what?
It makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had folks call us and say, you know, my cyber risk insurance policy says I'm not allowed to have users be able to log into admin portals. Well, here you go. Here's Microsoft fixing that for you, right? So, you know, why would you fight against that? But again, do your impact assessment, understand. But this is just like, they're just doing it for you, right? Get out of the business of worrying about identity and just let Microsoft make some of these simple choices so you can focus on delivering outcomes for your business. I love it. Whew. All right, so remember way back at the beginning when I talked about Microsoft carving out things outside of the E5 license. This was the guy I called out right here. Microsoft Entra ID governance is a standalone SKU inside the identity stack. And all of the capabilities of this had actually been introduced over the last 4 years and sort of just put into Entra P2. They weren't ever actually technically a part of Entra P2, according to Microsoft. So when they landed and they got their own SKU, they became something outside of that. There is some promotional pricing available for this right now if you have guest users and all that kind of fun stuff. But what this allows you to do is leverage AI and define things like access packages. So like an access package in my case generally defines what is a worker's role in my company. What do they do? What is their job? I define an access package that contains all the apps, all the teams, all the sites, all the whatever that they need to do their job at the right permissions level. And I simply add the user to one group, they get the access package, and they're off to the races. Super duper simple. But we also got governance for highly privileged roles, for application accounts, for all this other kind of fun stuff, and then life cycle workflows. And that's where we move down into the bottom half of this chart. Microsoft introduced an identity provisioning service that allows you to take any HR system of record, not just Workday, not just SuccessFactors, and not just Active Directory on-premise, any HR system of record for accounts, and use that to ingest identities into your Entra ID. And then also, if you need to go to other places, that's fine. But when we consume those things, we can feed them directly into lifecycle workflows. And the one that I set up was I built out a whole mock marketing department, right? When somebody gets hired and their department is marketing, and they match a certain job role and their start date is X, I can have a behavior or an action that's happened 7 days before their start date that creates an account. An action that happens the day before their start date that creates a one-time use code, sends an email to their manager, and instantiates their license so that things will be ready. I can then have a workflow the day they're intended to start that provisions some things, sends them a welcome email, puts them into some different groups, and all kinds of other fun stuff. It's all automated. It's all just built there. And that is Microsoft's first ever real joiner, mover, lever process. They have never had anything that was actually officially a part of identity management that could actually process joiner, mover, lever. And this is such an important innovation. Yeah, like this by itself is such an important innovation for small and medium business. And I say that because every enterprise on the planet that does anything with Microsoft had to invent their own joiner, mover, lever process, period. They had to create it from scratch. And one of the big challenges that we see organizations struggling with when they go from, yeah, we're just a small business to, no, we have like serious growth desires, is you can no longer just do the small business identity lifecycle management. You can't just clone accounts anymore. You can't just clone users. You can't even just give Bob Cheryl's old account. You can't do that, right? There's compliance concerns, there's security concerns, there's all sorts of things that just don't work that way when you have to scale your identities. So having a real system in place that does actual joiner, mover, lever process means that you don't have to invent that anymore. So like that's a major hurdle removed from going from
huge, especially for SMB, SMC. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why it landed at number 5 for me. All right. Moving on to number 4, right?
Number 4.
We've had cloud PCs for a few years, but we had some really interesting innovations this year. We got frontline support. We got boot to cloud PC. Again, it's another evolution of that whole concept of frontline support. Windows 365 switch that allows me to actually pin. So you can switch your desktops. Well, I can actually have Windows 365 as my desktop. And actually, you know what? Let's jump right into it. Right. So you can see with Windows 365 Enterprise, we have all these different wonderful experiences. We get the exact same capabilities for frontline, except we can now provision 3 employees with a single license. They all get their own separate machines. They just can't all be active at the same time. Only one user can be using that license at a time. They don't have to schedule it in advance. We generally are going to try to make sure that shift 1, shift 2, and shift 3 don't massively overlap, but there's actually been developments that allow a very, very slight overlap to occur without a licensing penalty. The cloud PCs, once the user logs off, they are simply turned down or set into a hibernate state, and then the license simply becomes available for the next user. So like this was one of the things we saw people actually gaming Windows 365 with in its very first days. We would see where if a license was active at any point in a 7-day period, the machine would stay alive, and users were trying to like bounce licenses and do all this kind of fun stuff. We don't have to do that anymore, right?
Like Windows 365 for like retail manufacturing, like
absolutely.
Yeah. That's absolutely. Wow, that's awesome.
Yes. So substantial cost savings, and all you really have to do is just deploy the right machine type. It's just a Windows 365 frontline worker, and it will intelligently manage the queue and the pool of machines that are available. And these are persistent machines. It's not like in Azure Virtual Desktop where you're pooling non-persistent machines that just go away, right? This is the user's actual full computer, personalized to them without having to import any profiles or anything. It's their PC. It's just when it's not on, somebody else can use that license.
Yeah. Well, no,
we also got what?
Nope. I was gonna say this isn't just like sharing someone's password. This is like a single license. Again. Like this isn't just one password being passed around. This is a license that's cool.
Yeah, again, this is talking about that scalability difference between SMB and enterprise, and how do you go between those things? How do you start to be growth oriented, right? And a lot of organizations have tried to solve that with credential resharing, device sharing, like all this kind of stuff. We don't have to be in that model. And again, so here you have the down here on the bottom left, what my taskbar looks like when I hover over my desktops, right? You can see I can go from desktop 1 to new desktop to actually Windows 365 as a fully separate desktop. And this is really super helpful when you have users who are maybe at home bringing their own personal device. You don't want to ship them a physical device for them to start working for your company. They can just run a cloud PC, and that cloud PC is attached to your environment, and they are not able to copy pasta machine content back and forth between the two environments. Super easy. And then we got GPU support, which was the #1 request out of Windows 365 for the last 2 years. This is going to be really, really, really important for, again, a lot of smaller and medium-sized businesses do a lot of video content, right? Whether it's rendering or editing or whatever. This is, I initially thought these were going to be for data scientists. They actually say it's not for data scientists. It is actually for video editors. And if you've ever had to try to do video editing on your local PC and you got a pretty decent GPU, and you want to make some toast, you can just put the bread on the keyboard and let it cook while you're doing video editing.
We're nerding out over here.
Yeah, but I mean, like, to be able to offload that to a device that's in the cloud, and I can shut the lid on this and go do something else. And if it wants to burn down a data center because it's running too hot, that's not on my electric bill anymore, right? So this is actually really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, no, it is.
Anyway, all right, so moving into the top three. Backups. Windows backup was introduced earlier this year, and a lot of enterprise dorks like myself kind of groaned because they're like, well, it's in Windows and I can't take it out, but I can't use it because if I have Windows Enterprise, I'm not allowed to. Yeah, whatever. This was actually custom built and designed specifically for SMB and home users. And again, it provides another option if you're dealing with device replacement or device reformatting. And we also got Microsoft 365 backup. So let's talk about what those things are, right? So in reverse order, rather than trying to build a deck that shows you all the cool things that Microsoft 365 backup can do, it's actually easier for me to just grab their FAQ about it. What is it? Why is it? Because Microsoft has always said that users can always restore as much content as they want, as long as it's within the last 30 days. But there's never been a system way or a system manager, an admin managed way to restore an existing mailbox to a previous state. That was always a user-initiated capability. I could restore the user, then the user could restore their content. It was always a hand-in-hand partnership. My favorite word in the entire English language when it refers to IT is scalability. That was not scalable, right? That's a terrible way to architect things. But what we're now supporting is this massive way of saying there was either a major disruption or a number of users were impacted by a silly thing. They don't have time to sit there and babysit this process. I, as the admin, that's my job, right? I am able now to go back in and do these backups, do these restores. I can do it across mailboxes, OneDrives, SharePoint locations. Critically, this is built on Syntex. So that is an additional SharePoint license capability. It is part of the AI all-up solution space, but there are some very critical actions that we can now take as admins on our users' behalves without having to say, write your password down on a sticky note and let me have access to your mailbox for an hour and I'll get this done for you. So we are, it's scalable.
I've done that. I'm sorry, I've done that.
Yeah, right. Everybody has, and it's a terrible practice. And you know what? We can get out of that, and I love it. I love it. This is so many organizations have bought third-party solutions to do exactly this, and I have seen so many people in shiny suits trying to justify the purpose of those as being for when the cloud is down. And my question is always, well, what are you going to do with that data when the cloud is down? You're not going to restore it to a data center, right? But that's not what it's for. It is for something has happened catastrophic to the data and we need to recover. It's not for the cloud is down and I need to stand up a data center quickly. So yeah, super cool. But we also got Windows backup. And again, this is not something that enterprise users can use, right? This is something that is designed for home and business and home and pro, right? You can basically set up Windows backup to back up your settings. It goes to OneDrive. OneDrive holds your settings, which is not just your data. It's also an application manifest and all that kind of fun stuff. The things that define and describe the environment. It's not exactly a full backup of C like we see on so many corporate users' desktops, right? They got their home drive somewhere and they got a backup of C drive and then they have an old backup of the old C drive. This is not that. This is take all my files, take all of my settings, and take my application manifest, put them in OneDrive. When I get a new computer or the help desk needs to reformat my hard drive or whatever, you drop ship me a new device, I can restore my old settings to the new computer and I'm just off to the races. Massive That's time huge. Saver. Yes. Yes.
Wow. Because if you didn't use I'm thinking about all of my files and I'm thinking about like all of my I'm like, whoa,
yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah. I mean, and enterprise organizations, they're dealing with things like enterprise device roaming. They're dealing with things like profile management out of things like FS Logics, that kind of stuff. This democratizes that capability into the hands of small business. No longer does a new device setup require a week worth of you fiddling with where things are on the desktop.
Yeah.
It just takes that away. Massive time savings. All right, number two. We got to it. We got to artificial intelligence.
I knew it was coming.
It had to be there. We can't talk about IT in 2023 without talking about AI. And technically, Microsoft has had AI capabilities in the Azure stack since like 2017, 2018, somewhere in that range. But they were principally the domain of data scientists. What we have seen since the introduction late last year of ChatGPT was kind of the rest of the world trying to catch up. And so we know that right now there are some pretty substantial licensing limitations and restrictions for small and mid-sized businesses to gain access to the Microsoft 365 Copilot. But there are a lot of copilots already out there in the market, right? Bing Chat, right? So if you open up, your Microsoft Edge browser, Bing Chat is now tied to your tenant, so your questions don't get released out into the wild, and it uses language models to help you build those answers, right? Windows 11, and then backported to Windows 10 also got Copilot, and I've used that pretty extensively just to help with like remembering where basic settings are in my device. I am. As much as I love doing like really cool IT stuff, I'm really not super great on the local desktop. And so like trying to remember how to change from light mode to dark mode or whatever, even trying to remember the terminology for that. Nah. I just ask Copilot and it just does it. Yeah. GitHub has a Copilot. Security Copilot has been accepting nominations for customers. And I think the nomination window ends like this week, but I mean, it's out there, it's in the wild. And I just actually had a conversation with somebody recently who was talking about they have access to Security Copilot. And they were saying like, I've got a pretty small IT team and they may not have like 25 years of experience because they grew their IT team out of an acquisition and suddenly had compliance requirements as a result of that acquisition. They wanted to get them up to speed, and Microsoft offered to let them into the Security Copilot program. Well, they said that without a lot of industry experience, sometimes it can be very difficult to get to the point where you feel like you can cover 80% of your attack surface. Copilot just did that for them. It just said, here are the things that you need to be aware of, and actually has the hooks into other things like identity management, device management, and even compliance management in Purview to recognize what these things are, to correlate that information, and to give you a post-mortem that's well written. And that actually by itself can save companies the entire investment cost in Security Copilot. Writing and dealing with postmortems is just the worst, right? To have that just taken off the board is it's a game changer. Clipchamp, which is Microsoft's video editing capability, and even Paint got AI makeovers. Paint, the venerable, just like throw it in there and create a BMP and be done.
I love Paint.
It's got layers now. It's got remove background. It's got an AI co-creator. It's not called Copilot yet, but I imagine they'll change that name. Power Platform obviously is like all up AI nowadays. Viva Sales, which became Sales Copilot, does some really cool things that are going to bear on what our last item will be. And Dynamics customers, right? You guys have had Copilot for quite some time. And then we got Teams Premium. And yeah, absolutely, Kristina, you're absolutely right. So
I'm sorry. Yes, I knew it.
There you go.
I knew it. I knew it. Okay.
And I'll be honest.
Give us the update. I will shut up.
The first part of this update is that this was not my number one, not even close. But when I put the question out to folks in the company, and every single person who voted for features that have been introduced in Teams this year. Every single one.
I mean, collaboration is key.
Collaboration is key. And like, again, my background is largely in larger organizations. So I'm worried about the things that can make me scalable and make my skills scalable. But like, I'm not a business user. So I don't think of things as a business user, but you guys all are. And so I really appreciate you guys chiming in and helping me out here. So this is not actually in the order of the way that things happen, but the new Teams app was introduced in preview back in March, and I was a holdout for quite some time. But Microsoft published, or actually paid for, this company, GigaOM, I don't know how they pronounce it, but the link is at the bottom. You can go look at the benchmark. But they paid this organization to benchmark Teams, the new Teams versus the classic Teams, and these are all images that are pulled from that document. What you'll see in the middle column is the installation time, system disk consumption, and memory consumption of old Teams versus new. In all cases, old Teams is the bigger bar, new Teams is the small one. For a low-end device, and I'll show you what those devices are in a minute, for a low-end device, was a 77% improvement in the time to deploy Teams. For a low-end device, new Teams consumes 75% less storage on disk. For a low-end device, new Teams consumes 50% less memory. And I don't know if anybody who's watching this has ever sat and looked at Task Manager and said, holy moly, Teams has taken what? But this is transformative. I mean, like, Teams used to sit there and just gobble up as much memory as was available to it.
Yeah.
The other thing that's really fascinating here is if you look at time to join a meeting and the time that it takes to switch between activities, old Teams was actually pretty rough, right? And this was the kind of like the number one bit of feedback we got from organizations was like, it takes way too long to join a meeting. New Teams is dropping that in general across the board by 41%. No, sorry, time to join a meeting by 48%, right? 48% for a low-end device. It gets better as you get to high-end devices in that case. But the time or the memory consumption across the board in meetings, right? You're no longer watching your machine turn into a pixelated stuck machine, right? It's just not doing that anymore. Yeah, it was infuriating, right? And so this is huge. And I present all of this because I know there are a lot of people, even inside our company, who are still running classic Teams because they're familiar with it, right? They don't want to make the jump.
Like that.
And to be honest, when new Teams was introduced, it was a little raw. There were a lot of features and capabilities that simply weren't there. Now, I want to strongly encourage anybody who is not yet ready to jump to new Teams to consider doing so very soon, because classic Teams actually now has a deprecation date. It will be no longer supported in any capacity as of June 30th of 2024. New Teams will be on by default for all organizations as of March 2024. So this is very soon. This is happening very soon. So it's time to start looking at getting users into the new Teams. Now, some of the ways that we can make that palatable is by actually looking at what that time savings ends up adding up to and how it translates to financial savings, right? So I meant to go back and add some colorful circles in this, but on the SMB side alone, for a 250 seat organization, they're saying that for line employees, they can save up to 107 man days per year, and for leaders, 24.94 man days per year, right? That's huge. That is a lot of time back from simply not watching it scrolly wheel while you're trying to join a meeting, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've joined a meeting and been like, I don't remember why.
I don't know. Yeah. I can't help you. I don't know.
And then turning those numbers into actual cost savings, if you could recover all of that time, that's $20,000 a year for a 250 seat organization. If you're a mid-sized organization, that's several people's salaries recovered simply by not waiting for Teams to switch gears. I just think that's insane. That's crazy amount of time saved. Now, it is worth calling out that in that particular assessment, they did show what the devices were. They showed what the 3 different device types were. So these are real machines that are really available in the market. They didn't cherry pick a low-end device to actually be like some gargantuan machine and everything is just scalable up from there. These were real, actual, devices, and they squarely put the Microsoft Surface in the middle.
This is the real deal, people.
It's the real deal, right? Yeah, and I got to say, about a month ago, I made the switch. It took me a couple days to get used to it, but I have actually gotten very accustomed to the new Teams, and I'm excited about not going back.
So I'll make the switch as soon as this webinar is over.
You absolutely should. So the other things that have happened
I've been having so many Teams problems. Yeah, I should.
Don't say that out loud. Anyway.
Well, no, I mean, I love Teams.
So other things that have happened in Teams have not just been related to the new Teams, right? So we've actually gotten some really cool introductions. Profile cards now support pronouns. And this has been a very welcome change. It actually helps make equity a little bit more of a thing that we can talk about for our users, right? And fairness and inclusion and all that kind of fun stuff is now here. We can set remote and office working hours. And we can actually set repeatable schedules so that people can know where we're going to be. And then, the time card and all this kind of fun stuff where we can actually see where people are expected to be, when they're going to be there, has made it super duper easy to get, communicating with people and understand where and when people are going to be. Avatars, which were first promised in March of 2021, finally came to what originally landed in classic Teams. They're now in new Teams. You can do all kinds of reactions with your avatar. You can build up to 3 separate avatars based on the way that you're feeling on any given day. You can actually now add backgrounds to your avatar's environments. You can change the view of your avatar. And then just introduced at Ignite this year, and I don't know that this will be impactful for small and medium businesses, but if you have, if you plan to use Mesh, well, that is now actually coming out, right? The Mesh Builder is now in preview, so you can start building your own custom conference spaces. You can do whatever you want to with that. It set up my avatars as quickly as I was able to, and I got to say that there are times when I am just not feeling camera ready. It's not appropriate for me to be on screen, and so this makes it very easy for me to participate, and it doesn't feel weird. It's actually pretty cool. And then last thing on the list, the thing that finally brings all this together, as to your point, Kristina, Teams Premium. Yes, holy moly, there's no way I can exhaust this in a minute and a half, but the fact that you get a summary of every meeting with speaker attribution, with automatic note taking, recommended actions that come out of it, mentions, a transcript, all this kind of fun stuff, that's all just the basics of Teams Premium. The rest of it here, getting into confidential information so you can actually bring your sensitivity labels into your Teams meetings and make sure that only the right people are able to participate in these conversations. The enhanced virtual appointments. I really wish I'd had time to build in a slide for this, but like appointment scheduling for 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 person organizations is like the lifeblood of it. And there wasn't any good provision for that anymore. Teams Premium makes that possible. And then the live translations, if you have people in multiple different geographies, I think it's up to like 20 languages now, they can just do live translations and live transcriptions. We rely on this for everything that we do now. It's fundamentally changed the way that we do business in the company. All right. Holy moly. That's it. That's my list. Did your thing make the list? Kristina, what do you think?
Okay. So obviously I knew Teams was going to be, I was hoping it was going to be the top of the list. I have to say the amount of security updates that you had, obviously from an end user perspective, I don't know about that side of the technologies, but
the security is that you shouldn't have to.
Well, no, but the security updates, I'm complimenting you. The security updates that you gave were huge. And I understand, even someone that does not go into, compliance manager or manage any of that, I understood the significance of the updates that you gave, and they were huge. And so thank you for that. I knew Teams was going to be at the top of the list. And again, coming from a user, Teams Premium has, from a marketing sales perspective, it changed our entire, the way that we're able, so I'm an incredibly forgettable person. I just forget things all, and the transcriptions, the notes,
it's amazing.
The action items, I cannot emphasize enough how much Teams Premium has changed marketing and sales from just the back end. It gets amazing.
Even just joining a meeting late and trying to come up to speed.
Just catching up.